Hi everybody, those of you who are joining live, thanks for joining the live stream today, and for those of you who are not live joining and you're watching the recorded version, thanks for joining the recorded version. Hopefully I can help today explain a little bit about how I work on the shadows of the skin and also how I build up the skin tone to get such a deep saturation that I'm doing for this piece Sweet 16. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about my setup here. I have this piece up on the drawing board kind of high. My drawing board is pretty big, but I've had to take the top of it and actually make it hang over my drawing board because I need to get this section right here where I can work on it and not have to put my arm and reach really high or really low. I want to kind of have it in the center of my desk so that my elbow is kind of relaxed beside my body and I can just lift it a tiny bit. I don't have to do a lot of effort with my rotator cuff in my shoulder because doing that's going to be very painful after very long, and this part of the skin takes the longest time to get this deep saturation, and so you really want to be in a comfortable ergonomic position. I'm always, sitting in the best position that I can possibly get in because I know I'm going to sit for at least an hour for each of my drawing sessions on the skin tones. The other setup issue is, well, first of all, if you've been watching this piece, one thing I haven't really talked about on my Facebook page or anywhere is that a lot of times when I finish a drawing, I put it up in a frame on the wall and I see, and I don't feel like it's as bright or pops as much as I would really like it to. So this particular piece, I decided from the very beginning to go with a very overly saturated look. I wanted to get those bright pinks and reds, and I wanted it to be vibrant and colorful. So that when I put it on the wall, you walk by, you can't help but notice it. I wanted it to look more attractive than just a photograph even would be with the natural skin tones. I wanted to enhance those skin tones and give them a lot of pop and saturation. It's one of the hardest things to do with colored pencil. A lot of people are always trying to figure out how to get that saturation without making it look muddy or messy. So what I've done is I have two different sources to look at, or reference photos. And I want to show you what my usual reference photo is on an iPad. And Walt has provided me this really cool board. It's actually like a wood piece of floorboard, and he has attached things on the ends, which is kind of hard to show, but that allows it to hang on my desk without actually touching my artwork. And my clips here, art clips, I just use to clip on my iPad. Generally speaking, I use an iPad for a reference, but if you look at this iPad drawing or photo, you can see it's not very saturated. It's actually, the actual photo I took was more muted tones. And so you can see just by comparing the colors that I've gone with a bolder, more bright, vivid color of skin tones than what the original photo was. But I like to use it because I can zoom in very close and look at the detail. I can see the mole, the shape. I can see like whether it starts lighter color and then it goes to dark. I can see where I need to put shades around the necklace and how it needs to fade and how the shadow needs to go in the necklace. It's very easy to zoom in and see all the little different areas. So I like to keep the iPad nearby. But I also, this time, I printed a larger, it's kind of noisy. I printed a large picture so that it was to scale with my drawing, and I cut it up so that it was like different sizes. This is just the section of the neck, and it makes it easier for me to handle, to move around if I want to look at it, to see if I'm in, if I have everything proportionately. I can even do this, and you can see that I'm good with my proportions just by doing that. But you can see that the color in even the printed photo, the color is lighter than what I'm going for here. I'm keeping these tones here very similar, but I'm going to be making these colors over here a more vibrant, rich red color. And I can't really explain, and that is something that's a little bit hard to teach on why I do it. It's just that particular color popped out at me, and it felt like it needed to glow and be more dramatic than this more drab, dark color. So when I was building up the colors, when I got to this shade, I really liked it. I felt like it was a rich, deep, vibrant, glowing shadow. So I'm going to show you how to do that and how I got this color. Now, in future videos, sometimes I do want it to match my photo exactly, and I would go with a little bit darker colors to get this tone. So we will do that in future videos, but today I'm going to be drawing this section. So I keep this little piece taped pretty close to my drawing. And that way it's kind of, it's not exactly the same, but I try to keep it on the same level, just so when my eye goes from left to right, I'm able to see clearly where I'm at, and I don't lose track of where the shadows start to change and get lighter. To start with, I always use the glassine paper. I have two pieces of glassine paper here by me. One is small. It's noisy when I video it, so I'm trying not to shake it too much. And the other piece is very big. Depends on where you're at in the drawing. I use a bigger piece when I'm up here, because literally sometimes I will lay my arm on my drawing and I don't want to get my skin oils onto the drawing. But today, because I've lifted the piece up, put that over there, this little piece is fine, because I'm really only going to be having my hand here, and I don't have to worry too much about my whole arms. It's just my hand. Now, one thing that happens when you're drawing and you start literally from the top down, a lot of this little bits of pencil dust will fall onto your drawing. Now, if I see that it's light pencil dust, I don't really care. I'm going to leave it alone, because if I go to erase it, I'll have a real light area. When I erase, I usually use the Derwent battery operated eraser, but if I were to erase that, like say for instance I erase here, what happens is, I don't know if you can see in the camera, I'm going to zoom in more when I start to draw, but this area here is a lot brighter than the area around it. So if I see stuff like this and I start really getting picky about erasing it, I'll have these lines where it's the eraser went and it's really clean, and then the other areas it won't, and then I end up getting really crazy about it, and then I have to erase every section. And using the eraser on the raw paper does change the texture just slightly of the paper. So I try not to use the eraser unless I really need it. I see areas that are going to be black over here. I don't need to for sure there, because that's going to be like her black shirt. But if I do see an area where there's something that just shouldn't be there, I will just kind of touch it with my eraser just to make sure those little dark pieces aren't there if I don't want them. But it's not real critical. Only worry about it if you have like a light skin area and you have a piece of black, because if you start drawing over that light skin area and you go over that black, you're literally going to drag that black into your skin tone, and it's going to be a lot harder to get rid of it. I use this brush here, this dusting brush, to just kind of lightly, it's not going to hurt the piece you've already drawn, just brush over to get all that loose pencil off. And if you're ever drawing with other mediums in the room with you at the same time, make sure and cover this color pencil drawing with some large sheet of glassine and tape it down so that charcoal and pastel and other mediums don't land on this, because I've had that happen where pastel has landed or charcoal has landed on my drawing, and it makes a mess, and you have to really be careful to erase it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit closer, because I think drawing like from this distance you don't get to see the tiny little pores and the detailed work that I do. So before I start drawing, I'm going to stand up and zoom the camera in. I'm going to zoom it in. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so that's probably good. I'm going to stay in the lower neck area here. I'm only going to be drawing for about 45 minutes, so to get us a full hour video here. And so it doesn't need to be a very large area, because as you all know, if you've been playing with colored pencils or trying to learn colored pencils, it takes a long time to create one area the way you want it to look, especially when you're working on these shadows. It's not one layer, it's multiple. Now I've tried to start with, I've tried to sharpen all my pencils so that I don't have to keep sharpening them, but you may occasionally hear me, the zip of my pencil sharpener, because if I do have to sharpen the pencils periodically. In fact, very frequently. It's one of the #1 things I tell people is make sure and keep very sharp pencils, because especially with the more layers you get with Polychromos, you will see these tiny little dots start to appear when you're creating dark shadows. And to make that as smooth as you can possibly get it, you have to use a very sharp pencil to fill in those little dots. And it can be time consuming and tedious, but the results are much more amazing, and you're gonna have people saying, wow, how did you get such smooth skin tones? Well, I'm gonna show you how. So I'm gonna start with this light flesh. Typically, this entire drawing has started, all of her skin has started with light flesh. And the reason being, she's a light skin tone, and it's one of the lightest colors. Now, I could use the ivory pencil, and I could use some of the cream. But the problem with putting ivory and cream underneath first is then it creates sort of you really just need to do this on a scratch paper and see what the difference is. When I put the light ivory or the cream down and then I go over the light flesh, it's never going to be as deep of a saturation as I need. And since I know we're going for an overly saturated look, I have to start with something darker than these two. Otherwise, it won't be saturated enough. Now, I'll still use these colors in the skin tones. You're going to see, even in this area, both of these colors, but they're not the first color. So even though people will tell you, and you probably hear in some tutoring tutorials and other people's techniques, they'll tell you, well, you need to start with the lightest color and build your way up. That's not always true. If I pause for a minute, it's because I'm drinking water. That's not always true. In my case, for my techniques, you don't start with the lightest necessarily. Doesn't mean the lightest won't be used. So I'm going to start, and as some of you already know who have followed me for a long time, I'm drawing in ovals. It may look like I'm just doing these straight lines. I will tell you if I move to a brush stroke, which is a line where I go left to right, and I just brush and lift it up at the end of the stroke. That's called what I call a brush stroke. I'll tell you if I switch to that. Otherwise, if you see me drawing, I'm actually making these small ovals. Even though the camera or, just watching me because I'm going fast may look like I'm going straight back and forth, I am actually turning the pencil, rotating it around in ovals. I'm also rotating my pencil in my hand. You'll see me do that a lot. It's not just a habit, it's a purposeful movement. What happens is, when you're drawing with these little ovals, there becomes a flat spot on the pencil, and it gets very sharp on that opposite side. So when I rotate my pencil, I'm pulling in the sharpest side. So I make another flat angle, then I rotate it and I have a flat angle. It keeps my pencil sharp. It keeps me using the sharp piece of the pencil. So, and I'm also kind of going more at a side than I am straight up and down. I will tell you when I do straight up and down like this. There is a time that I use the pencil literally straight up and down like this. But most of the time I'm doing this. So I'm going to sit here and make these now, when I'm tying into an area that I've not colored, I start on top of the area I've already colored. And I'm very lightly, this is ever so lightly touching. Remember, I squeeze my pencil really tight. I'm not pushing hard. It's a very, very, very light oval. You can see how light it is because when I come over to the white, there's not much color there. I start very light on top of the last piece, and as I get to the edge, I press a little bit harder, and that way you won't ever see where I tied in. I stopped and started in here over and over and over, and you'll never really be able to see because I'm using these little oval strokes and I'm building it up as I go, and you won't see. Now I try to find places to stop, like right here. I tried to stop there intentionally because I do have a wrinkle, a real light wrinkle that I kind of want to show up. But what I'm going to do is just sit here and make these little ovals. You can do it in one spot like this if you want and just work on this whole little spot, or you can do a little bit larger area where you're laying that first base coat. And as you go, your goal is to make sure that each of these little areas is equally saturated. So you'll move your pencil around in these little circle ovals and turning your pencil every now and then so you get a sharp edge, because you'll see little spots of the paper. This is Stonehenge paper by Legion paper. You'll see little tiny pieces of the paper that have a little hole-like spot where it doesn't, not a hole, but a little space where the white paper is showing through, and you may have to rotate your pencil and use a sharp edge to fill that little section in. So what happens is you get a nice even saturation of the color, and you don't have these little holes. The reason that's important, if I ignore these little holes as I go along, these little white spots, then when I go back over, those little white spots will forever be lighter than everything else. So in order to make sure that my skin tone is even and smooth, I have to make sure that every little section is covered with evenly and consistently. So I'm going back in and filling it in. So just in this little area. And now normally I would just go ahead and finish this skin tone area and then move to the next. But because we have limited time and time flies by when I'm doing these, it's like I forget how much time it actually takes me to draw the skin. And so I always think, oh, I'm going to do this whole section in 1 hour. Realistically, I'm going to do a little piece here and I'm going to do some over here, especially because I'm also talking and trying to teach at the same time and not just drawing in, you know, at my normal speed. So I'm gonna kind of just move my way with the base, and you're gonna see how, and this, you can actually just practice this base. This base is very important because it's the same continual process on top of it with other colors. But you can practice this on a piece of paper and make your goal just be to cover a piece of paper or a small piece of paper with color pencil and try to make it equally saturated where there's no little dots that are darker and no little gaps that are white paper. And once you get that down, it's really just super easy. Your brain just kind of knows, okay, where I need to fill in those spots. Don't be upset if sometimes you do end up with a little, sometimes it's the paper itself has a little flaw in it, and so it'll take the pencil lead a little bit more in that area than it does in other areas. So you might end up with like a little saturated spot like right here, or you might go, wow, now it's not consistent. This is too dark and this is too light. It's not going to ruin your picture. You don't have to erase it to get it back down to the consistent, because we know it's all going to be built up darker than this. So the goal is just to try to make it consistent in the saturation. So do you have enough on there to, sorry, when I draw, it gets a little bit harder to speak whenever I'm drawing because my brain starts immediately trying to drift into that right brain mode and stop logic and speaking. And so sometimes I sound like I don't know how to speak when I'm drawing. So I'm going to get a little section of this over here, and then when I get to this darker shadow, I'm going to show you how I start building up the shadow colors. Most of this shadow now is going from dark. You see it goes really dark to a little bit medium to a little bit lighter. There's some real harsh shadows in her face. You can see them here. You can see that line there, which still I'm going to be doing some blending here. You can see a really dark, harsh shadow here. A lot of people are afraid to do these harsh shadows like this because they think it's going to be, it's not going to look realistic. They think, oh, well, that's just going to look like I drew on her face. If it's in the photo and it looks realistic, it's going to look realistic when you draw it. Bottom line, if you see it in the photo and you like the photo, you're not going to have a problem copying it exactly like you see it. So don't be afraid of creating these harsh lines in the photo that you see. Now, what you do have to be really careful about is when you're looking right here at this shadow, some people will try to draw a literal line. They just make a dark line. Well, that's going to look like you drew a dark line on her face. But if you were to zoom in really even close to this, you can see that what it has done is gone from this dark shadow to like a purpley color to this light flesh color. So it fades in here. It doesn't look total solid sharp line. It's a faded line, which is what shadows naturally do. You will see some places in the face where it's a very sharp line, where it's a contrast from dark to light, and because I saw that in the photo, even here under her lip, she has a pretty deep crease right under her lip, and so in the photo it really showed that dark, deep, crisp line. Now I have to fade this a little bit more on the end. So the goal is to copy what you see in the reference photo. So I've already, just this little bit you've seen me use the pencil, it's already not sharp enough. I don't really think people understand when I say sharp pencils, how sharp I really mean. Yes, I eat through my pencils a little bit more than most people, but I keep it sharp at the end all the time. There are some times when you're watching my videos that I will tell you, don't go so sharp because it needs a softer blending effect, and sometimes on top layers I will use a less sharp pencil, and sometimes I have to have it sharp. But on the first layers, I'm always, when I say sharp pencil, I don't mean like they come out of the box. A lot of people will pull out a pencil out of a box that's brand new and say, well, it's new, it's sharp. And I'm like, that's not sharp. They don't come sharp. So I'm going to follow the skin tone, the skin grain, I guess you say. If you were putting on makeup on a face, you're taught to put makeup on to wipe over the way the skin kind of grows, I guess. I'm going to go this way, and up here you saw me going left to right. That's my general strokes, always left to right, bottom left corner, upper right, bottom left corner, because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, I'm teaching people now that are left-handed, and I'm realizing that they do something different. I guess it's this way. But for me, it's always this way. It keeps all the strokes on my paper very uniform and makes it a little bit easier. But when you come here, you'll see that sometimes I'll do these brush strokes like this because I need it to go like this. I need the skin to look like it's gone like this and meets together. Those are the lines of the skin, the natural wrinkles and lines. So I'm going to kind of follow those natural wrinkles. So I'm going to start here and just start picking up, tying in the base coat to the shadow. Probably right in here is some of the darkest area. So I'm going to tie in some of this base coat just in this small little area here. This area needs to get a lot darker. And I'm doing my little ovals. And I'm just laying out some of the base so that I can start going on top of it with some of the other colors. I know everybody's eager to know what colors I use, so I'm going to show you. Now, I'm going to avoid too many of my yellows and cream and ivory in this area because those are going to, once you put ivory or cream down in the Polychromos colors, you need to be committed to a light area like this. You can put them on top later to pull out that color tone if you want, but if you put them on the bottom layers, you need to be committed to that being a light area of skin because it's never going to get as dark and deep as, for instance, this area if you start with the light. I wouldn't say never, but it would be a lot more frustrating and hard to get to that point. So I'm just going to lay on quickly a little base here. And now I'm going to go to what color I would use next. So this area is going to be pretty dark, but I'm going to go ahead and pick up the next color, which is medium flesh. So you have 3 colors of flesh in the Polychromos line. You have light flesh, medium flesh, and dark flesh. Does that mean that's all there is? No way. I'm going to use so many other colors. And this one, because it's first of all, I'm doing the same process. I'm starting over the top and going very light touch. And I'm following that. The reason I'm not going this way is I'm following that line of skin tone. So the reason that I'm not pushing very hard on this is because this is a pretty rich color. And you don't have to press very hard to have the color show up. If I press too hard, I'm gonna probably have to resolve myself that this is the color tone I'm going to get in that area, and I'm going to build up. So anytime I know I'm going to be putting a lot of layers down, I'm going to put more light touch just so I can get that little bit of area put in there. So light flesh and the medium flesh are good go-to first colors to lay down over a shadow area, and I'm going to kind of blend it into this area here. Some of this area I'm having to use my imagination because, like I said, my reference photo is different. It's not quite as saturated in this bright, vibrant color. It's more toned down. So I have to kind of go with my imagination and start building up. Now I'm going back over the area I've already done and then blending into the shadow area here. Okay, and I'm doing the same. I know it doesn't look like I'm doing circles, but I feel it in my hand. They're little tiny circles. Now some of these areas I can see, what I'm watching for is an area right here. And I'm doing a brush stroke now. I'm lifting. And the reason why is I kind of want to define this little line in the skin. And I see that there's another little line in the skin right here. And so I'm brush stroking it to kind of get the line. It's making the base a little darker in that area. And then when I go back with my coloring strokes, they'll always be darker right here where this little line is. Now those lines that I see in the skin are not really this color. But this is just a step for me to go upwards to get to the color of those little wrinkles and lines in the face. So I'm just going to continue to color here with these little oval strokes, trying to build up the skin tone. And the way I'm remembering, even though I'm not coloring it the same color as I see in my reference, the way I'm remembering how dark things need to be is I am looking at a step down. It should be a nice gradient. It should go from this dark color to light to lighter. Now, what's most important is the values, not the color. So you could change the color on your own anytime you want, as long as you keep the values consistent. So when I say that, if it's dark in the reference photo here, but lighter than that dark here, if you keep that step of the dark and light values accurate when you're drawing, it doesn't matter what color you make. I could make her a Martian, and I could make her in all green tones. And if I did that, she would still look just like the dimension would be there, the depth would be there, because I would have dark greens here, medium greens, and light greens. And then I would have dark. It would have all of those accurate gradual fading. You'll see that as I'm pointing things out, I start seeing things, and I'm not finished with any of this face. I'll probably be going back up and doing multiple little pieces as I go. But so when you see me stop, it's because something popped out at me, and I see that I need to soften or fix the shadow. And you're going to keep seeing things like that as you do your pieces, and that's what takes so long to finish a face, because as soon as you think you're done with it, you move on, you get another part of the skin tone finished, and then you're like, wow, I should have done this, and you go back and do it again. So this is not the ultimate color that I want for those creases in the skin. I'm just building up the tone and the value, and still it doesn't look very smooth. It's very grainy. You can actually see the pencil grain in here. A lot of people will do this kind of thing and say they're done. Okay, I got the skin color right. Why is mine smooth, not so smooth, and yours is? It's because you're not finished. You have to just keep building these skin tones. Now, I'm running out of base, so I'm going to go ahead and put some base down here because I want this color on the bottom. So I'm doing my little ovals. And also remember that we are looking down at this drawing, not straight at it. So your proportions, my proportions are going to look different here to you than they do when you see my reference photo. When you see my updates on Facebook, because I take the pictures straight on. But when I'm drawing for you guys, the camera's looking straight down and not straight at otherwise you'd be seeing the back of my head. So this is why the proportions look a little bit different. So I'm kind of going ahead, and now when I see my reference photo, this area right here is really light, this light flesh color, which when I say really light, it's this light. So I'm going to not put too much color on this, but I know about right here, I can tell because of in relation to where the mole is, it's actually kind of just barely past here. I'm going to start having to gradiate this dark down to a little bit lighter. So I'm going to start with this medium flesh and kind of start pulling in some of the medium flesh and gradiating it. And then as I move across here, I can press a little harder right here because it's so close to this dark edge. But as I move towards this light edge, I have to lift my pencil. So I'm not touching it very much at all, and to the point where I'm like touching it like a feather as it blends into this color. That's a consistent technique no matter what layer you're on, top, bottom, whatever. When you're working from a dark area to a light, you're starting with this dark color and then you're just kind of lifting it as you go to get away from here. It's the same as when a brush stroke. If you practice a brush stroke on your paper, if you were to go like this and lift as you get to the end of the stroke, you will notice that when you start pushing pressure, you're pushing harder, and as you lift it, it gets lighter. So a brush stroke is essentially the same thing, and I sometimes will use a brush stroke along the edges to define the edges of my necklace. So it's like I press hard and lift as I get to the end, and that way it doesn't leave a dark dot at the end of my line. Often you'll see that dark dot at the beginning of the line where you started it, a brush stroke. It's the same thing with coloring. If I start coloring right here, it could leave a dark spot here. So I'm going to start coloring where it's already dark, and then that way my little continuous loop of circles, ovals that come down here don't leave little dark saturated areas. So I'm just kind of gradually getting this. Now there is kind of what happens is when you start using this medium flesh, you're going to start saying, wow, this is a lot of pink. My skin should not be this pink. And that's okay because I know I'm not done yet. I'm going to start bringing in other colors. So since this session goes pretty fast and we only have 30 minutes more left or so, I'm going to go ahead and pull in some other colors. So once I've got this face down, so right in this area, I'm immediately starting to see that I'm missing a little bit of my orange tone. So there's two orange colors that you should remember for Polychromos pencils that you're going to use in face quite a bit, in a face. And that is Sanguine and also Terracotta. And the difference, let me explain the difference from Sanguine and Terracotta. And one other tone that kind of is often used is Venetian Red. I like the Venetian Red a lot. Oh, I thought I had my Sanguine here all ready for you, and I don't. The Sanguine has both orange and pink in it. So you'll see it looks completely, I don't know why my Sanguine won't show up. It has both pink and orange mixed. So if you want to use the something that's not totally orange but partly orange, all my Sanguines, it's not cooperating today. Hey Walt, over there they're labeled on the handy dandy Tiffany's. She has a box. I have these little stands, pencil stands by Tiffany's, and it's called Tiffany's Art, I think. I think I found the Sanguine. No. She creates a, I put little names by every little hole, and I stick my pencils in them, and it's S-A-N-G-U-I-N-E. And it makes it easier. I don't know why my Sanguine's not here, because I use it quite frequently. I must have picked it up to use it somewhere. It's also over there inside the big box in the Faber-Castell. But let me show you Terracotta while he's looking. Oh, I found it, Walt. Sanguine and Terracotta are very similar. Thanks. This is why I always have a helper. This is just Sanguine. And my pencils will start to get really dirty because I'm holding them all the time with other pencils in my hand. So if you look closely at these two colors, it's really hard when you're just grabbing them out of a bin or something. They look very, very similar in this part. Even in this part, the lead, or if you put the lead up to the white, it looks very similar. The difference is Terracotta has got mostly all oranges, and the Sanguine has like a pink and an orange mixed together. So I'm going to take the Sanguine first because this is so pink and I need more orange, but I don't know right now that I'm ready to use this Terracotta, which is so orange. So I'm going to kind of start fading and you're going to look at your reference photo and see where you see that orange tone. Sometimes you think you need to put orange and you really just need some of that cream, because what happens when you put yellow and red together is you get orange. So if I start pulling in some creams, I'll start seeing a lot of the color that I need, the brighter orange. So I'm putting some of the Sanguine in, and I can see that it already starts to kind of brighten it up and make it a little orange. Well, there's this natural progression of building up shadows and skin tone, is when you start putting one color down, it's immediately noticed that you need another. And that's how you can get the accurate skin tones and shadows. You start working on it in one area, it starts to look like a bruise. That means it's too purple. And so you put some pink or orange in it. And then when you start working with the orange and it starts looking like she's like kind of jaundiced or something, or the yellow, then you start adding the pinks or the purples back in. So it's a continual balance. Now, a lot of people want to use brown for their shadows. I tell everyone, just if I could, honestly, at this point, as many people as I've taught with colored pencils, I want to just take their brown away. I know that sounds kind of drastic, but because you can use brown in a lot of great places, and lots of browns in hair, and brown in tree trunks and scenery and everywhere. And I mean, there's a little bit of brown even in her mole, but I just want to take it away because most people want to use brown for these shadows. I don't know what it is about, maybe the eye looks at a shadow and says, I see brown, and starts immediately going to pick up that brown, but there's no brown in these shadows. And yes, somebody mentioned to me not too long ago, well, don't all these colors mixed together make brown? Maybe, but it's not brown like it comes out of the pencil. You're just going to put dirt on her face. And I have had to do that when I drew my piece alone. I put dirt all over her face. Intentionally, because she had a dirty face. And in that instance, I used a lot of nougat and bistre and brown, and those you definitely need, will find that you need it. So now I'm putting the Sanguine on. I'm starting to realize that it's really orangey and pink here, and I'm not seeing those purpley shadows. So what I'm going to do is grab my first purple, my most important, there's two really important purples that I'm using in this piece. One of them is the Purple Violet, and one of them is a light magenta. So the light magenta and the purple violet are both very crucial to this piece. And now if you want to see where, you can kind of almost see them start to popping out into skin tones when I hold it up there. I put it, and when I move it around, you can see this color. Now, when I'm just like this and you looked at it at first, you might not have picked out that color until somebody holds it up next to it. Now you can see how much of that color exists. Now, I do that same thing when I'm trying to decide what colors to use in an original reference photo. I will hold my pencils up to it and say, what does this look like? So as I'm moving it around, I actually even see an area that I want a little bit more of this because it got kind of missed in this area. So when I'm working on the top of this many layers of skin, I have a really sharp pencil, and I am so lightly, I wish you've got to try this. Build up a bunch of layers of Polychromos and then take a really sharp, different color and see what happens when, I can even relax my hand to this degree. See what happens when you put a very light touch. It will add color. It's kind of the opposite. When I used to work with Prismacolors, I noticed that with Prismacolors, the more I layered on, the harder it was to get it to stick. It's a little bit different with Polychromos. The more I layer on, the easier the colors lay on top and they stick. So when you see an area that needs to be blended, or you see, okay, well, I don't have the right colors in there, and you want to pull in, like I want to pull in some medium flush on top of that area, I can lightly, I don't even have to hold my pencil tight. I can lightly just use the side of my pencil, and I don't know if you can tell from the video, but it's changing. It's actually changing the colors I'm looking at there. Just this really light amount, because it's so thick of layer of pencil there. It gets so thick that when you end up picking this piece up at the end, it's heavy. It's weighted down with what feels like some kind of paint. So when I go back over this to blend this little spot that I feel like shouldn't be there, just this tiny little touch on the top layer fills in these little tiny spaces and smooths it out. You might not be able to see it so clearly in the video, but in real life I can see the difference. Another thing that I do on the top layers, which we'll do right here in a second, once I lay some of the colors down with these purples I'm about to do, I will go back over it with a light flesh on top, or medium flesh, or in darkest areas, not this color, but something lighter than these, to blend it down and soften it. So let's go ahead and start with the purple. This is the purple violet. There's a couple of areas in here that I said were getting really pinky, and I'm not seeing pink and orangey, and I'm not seeing this shadow that's supposed to be here. So I'm going to use a brush stroke, and the reason I'm using a brush stroke here is the reference photo has a line, and it actually comes to almost a point about right here, and that's one of them. And then under here, it actually has a line kind of going the wrong way. It's like she has a little wrinkle that kind of goes the wrong way. So I'm going to follow that and do a brush stroke. Brush stroke is touch it, and go and lift. It's like I'm painting it on. And so I'm just kind of painting on this shadow here where I want it to be. Just painting it on. Brush stroke. I'm lifting it in between. When I get to the end of here, I'm lifting it, putting it back down. I don't want to press hard because this purple color, it can be too much. It can be overpowering, and I don't want it to look super purple, but that's going to happen. So as we move through this shadow and I add darker purples and pinks and oranges and sanguines, it'll start to even out and start to look more like a shadow and less dirty. But the balance, the goal is getting the balance so that it's enough purple to look like a shadow, but not so purple that it looks like a bruise. And that can be really tricky. Sharp pencils and combination of two different strokes, a brush stroke and an oval stroke. Now I'm brush stroking it, and I'm turning my pencil and filling in these tiny little dots. This is the lightest touch. I am not having to put hardly any touch at all to bring that pink tone to a little bit more of a purple shade. It's just a super light touch. Okay. And then I'm going to move along. This is too orange now, and now I can clearly see that it's too orange, so I can take the purple to downplay some of the orange, but this purple is going to get too dark in a minute because it's not over here. It's only over here in this really darker purple. So to step down and not have such a dark purpley color, I'm going to step down with the light magenta. And to step down with it, I mean I'm going to go back over where I was and just kind of brush stroke in a little bit of the light purple, light magenta. And I'm going to pull it down. It's going to be a combination of all these colors that build up to look more like the whole skin tone of the face. So I'm just going to kind of lightly put that in. And some of these dark purple shadows, that lines that I put, ended in this purple light magenta. So I'm kind of pulling those. You can put light magenta down as a base even, because it's pretty much the same value. It's kind of hard to see, but it's the same value as the light flesh. So there's often times when I see, okay, this area is going to need a lot of the light magenta. For some reason, there's like a glow of light magenta right under here. And I'm brush stroking it the way the wrinkles move. But I can kind of see that brush, that light magenta right here. Now I know as I'm putting the light magenta on, all of a sudden in the reference photo, I'm starting to see pink. And that's going to happen as you start laying the first color that you think you see, you start laying it down as a base coat. It's going to make, your eyes are going to start saying, okay, this is too purple. That's because this is not the color of her skin. It's just one of the many tones. So I'm tying it in by going over it first here and pulling it out, the light magenta. Now I'm going to say, okay, well, this is too light. Here, it's got to go one more step. It can't go from this dark to super light. It has to go to another step. So we need to build the area up between here and there. So if you were to lay this light magenta, because I know it's going to be there, I don't put this down unless I know it's going to be there. So in some broad areas, there's hardly any light magenta. It's almost like more of a yellow cream tone. And so I might not need this light magenta. But if I see it in the reference photo kind of glowing, you have to look really close. Hold this pencil to your reference photo and hold it up and look at it and see if you see it pop out. It works the same as it does here, where you see the light magenta when you hold it over it, as it does in a reference photo. So holding your pencil over your reference photo will help you know what that next color you need to use. If you're not sure what next color you need to use, then just pick out several pencils and hold them over your reference photo until one starts to kind of pop out at you. So I'm brush stroking this on here, but I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple more colors that I'm going to be adding to it, because what I'm going to do is teach you some of the colors. You're going to have to practice pulling in those colors and layering them yourself to match your reference photo. Your reference photo might look different than mine. So these are just all go-to colors that I will be using for skin tones. I'm using cream. Now cream I can start over here, but it's lighter. This cream actually looks like a yellow. It's like a lemon yellow for Polychromos, but it's actually called cream. And I could start over here anywhere. I don't want it to really be my base. I don't want to press hard as my base, because this area, well, actually this area probably is right here. This is the lightest area of her neck skin right here. So if I were to go here, it's okay, because I'm not going to ever need to get to this dark shadowy color. I could do this, but you see how light that is? So, but when you put it on top of this magenta and the skin, light flesh, it doesn't do much. I'm just doing a brush stroke and I'm just laying the color in there. It doesn't do a whole lot, except for it adds a bright color to it. It kind of brightens up that. So it's not like it's really, you're not going to make her whole skin yellow. You're just adding the yellow base in the skin. So I'm still using a brush here. I could also come over here and just kind of do my little oval circles. I'm doing a very light touch, even though I'm squeezing my pencil. I could just do this. This is a really bad habit of squeezing my pencil. I feel like I have a lot more control when I squeeze my pencil. So I'm going to work on this little area here right now. I know we're still kind of doing shadows, but I'm going to build this up, because you see that clear line? I'm going to show you how I can get rid of that clear line and you won't see that line anymore. So I've gone and added in some of that color. Now I'm taking the light magenta, because when I look at that, to tie it in, it's going to need some more of the light magenta. So I'm going to kind of go over it here. And I'm going to start building this color up to get rid of that line. We'll have a new line, because I'm going to stop here somewhere. So there'll be a new line. Filling in, doing the same consistent thing I talked about, filling in those little tiny holes. Being consistent to fill in those little, keeping it about the same tone. It's getting a little darker, but we still have a clear line there. So I'm going to use my light flush again. And I'm going to go right over it, but kind of the side of it. If I go too much over it, it's going to keep darker there. So I'm going to try to go right next to that line using a very sharp pencil and going over light flush. Super sharp pencil. And this is when you really start to see and appreciate how much effort goes into colored pencil. This is super time consuming to sit here and rotate my pencil and fill in all of these little tiny spots and holes and try to get this to build up to the right skin tone color. It's a lot of effort. Now sometimes you're going to see that there's like a piece that's a little darker, so I'm going to go here. And you might actually decide that it's too dark. If you notice I went this way all of a sudden, sometimes the paper has a little crease in it, a line or a crack. I've seen people freak out and say they have to start over because there was a crease or a line in their paper. In my workshops, actually when I'm teaching workshops, someone always raises their hand and says, help me, there's a cut in my paper, it's damaged, what do I do? It's not the end of the world. You just go with that grain of that cut and fill it in, because I have a couple little areas. Sometimes they land in a perfect spot. It's like a wrinkle and you're like, oh wow, I needed that little cut there. I actually know people who use that technique. They'll slice into their paper just a little bit with a razor to give like hairlines, and I personally don't like that technique. I prefer smooth paper, but if there is a crease, I'm not going to cry about it. I'm just going to fill it in. And all these little tiny dots and pores of the paper, turning your pencil and you can fill it in. So you can see it's getting darker. That line is fading away. Now if I start to see there was an area that had still a little bit too dark, I can go back with the ivory pencil and I can just kind of go over it with the ivory. That was a little bit dark there, like a little spot, and I'm doing the little circles in the ivory and I'm pressing it down and kind of smoothing it out. The lighter pencil on top of a darker pencil serves as almost like a blender. A lot of people use blender pencils. I hate blender pencils because what they do is take up the color and smash your paper and make it just ugly. I mean, to me, that's my experience. Some people use them and maybe they love it and you can't tell that they've used it. I don't like them. I recommend using another color. The whole idea of drawing is adding color to the paper. And, and we're not painting. We don't need to smear it across the paper. We need to fill it equally and evenly and consistently. So I don't like blender pencils because I'm not trying to blend it by taking a colorless pencil and moving color around. The way I get my color where I want is saturating it with color. So if that color happens to be ivory, and my blending pencil happens to be ivory, that's fine. If you look now, that line is completely gone. You probably don't even remember where the line was. Maybe if you're watching this video recorded later, go backwards and see where that line was, and you'll see that it's gone. I even have a dark piece here. This is too dark of an area. There's nothing in my reference photo that shows this dark little line. So wherever I stopped there, for some reason, it's kind of a dark line. I'm going to show you how to get rid of that dark line. So I'm just kind of filling in the base. And I'm going to get rid of that dark line. So how do I get rid of that dark line right there? I first build up the colors I need. This is the lighter section of the skin. There's 3 main colors in this lighter section, and it's the cream, ivory, light flesh, 4, and magenta. So we'll take the light magenta, and I'll just kind of build it up here around this little dark area. And I can go faster than, when you're first starting out, you're going to be going super slow. I can move faster, but for the sake of the video, so you can see all my strokes and what I'm doing, and so I can talk about it and not get carried away, I am going a little bit slower. Now, as I build these darks and lights values, there are different values. You can see that this is a darker value than this, and depending on how hard you press. If I were to press really hard with this and really hard with this, light magenta pressed really hard and light flesh pressed really hard, this is clearly a darker value than this. So by knowing that, what I'm actually essentially doing is layering darker values with lighter values. With these two, we know that the cream is a darker value than the ivory. It's a lighter value. So the process of going dark light is what gives you this very, very smooth, creamy effect. So I'm continuing with my light flesh here, and I'm going to rotate them out. And the reason I'm doing it here, now over here I was showing you a whole broad area. Here I'm just showing you a small little section at a time. And so you get to see the whole process for this area. So now I need a little bit more magenta. Hold in here. And as I go, each time I'm filling in consistently so that it stays everything covered equally. No really dark spots, no really light spots, except for that one spot there that we're going to get rid of. I'm going to go back. And how do I know which one? I'm trying to match this color. It's a matching game. It's no different than if you were in kindergarten and, you know, the teacher asks you, does this match this? Is this darker than this or lighter than this? Or, you know, whatever. When you're playing a matching game, which one is different? Is one darker than the other? If it is, keep working on the other. Is it peacher than the other? Is it more yellow than the other? Is it more purple than the other? You have to constantly, really all art is and all drawing is a whole sequence of problems that you're trying to constantly solve. And so I'm trying to constantly solve my problem. What color? How do I make this look exactly like that? I have to add more of this color here and more of this color here and more of this color here. I continue to work it until it starts to look uniform and blended. And when I start to see that all those colors are blended together, my line starts gradually disappearing. That little dark line that we saw, very, very dark. And it was like, why is that line dark there? There's no mole there. There's no blemish in her skin. Shouldn't have been there. So I'm going to keep building up around that line. I haven't gone over that line. If I go over it, it's going to get darker. So we want to avoid getting it darker because it didn't need to be there. But all the rest of the skin tone around it is getting built up. And the reason I'm moving my pencil different directions is a couple of areas in this paper does have like a little slice or something in it. And so I have to fill that direction. I have to go the direction of that little slice or that hole or that space in the paper. I can feel it with the tip of my pencil. Now I'm going to blow it off a little. I blow it a lot. You can use your brush to dust it, but sometimes you'll see me, you might, if you look close enough at the video, you'll see dust just disappear. It's because I'm blowing it. I'm not necessarily always brushing it. So now it's kind of grainy there, so I'm going to use a little bit of the yellow here to pull it in. It also needs a little bit more of the yellow because I can see it needs to match up here. So I'm going to put I call it yellow, but it's cream. That's all color I'm using here. Okay, so now I'm going to go back over with a little bit of the ivory on top of that line I said I didn't like, just to kind of push it down even a little lighter. And I'll just kind of go over the whole area here with the ivory. Ivory will add a little bit of a it's less white, it's less pink, it's just kind of, for skin tones, it's just a kind of an evening color. It's less for light skin tone people. And so I will use this ivory kind of very lightly on top. It also works as a very nice blending pencil, but sometimes when you top something off with ivory, it looks desaturated, and you don't want that. So I'll finish it off with another real light touch of the light flesh on top of the ivory. Gets rid of that desaturated look, puts back some of the saturation into the skin tone. And then it's like this nice, even, smooth. And now you can see there. Remember that line that was there that was real solid looking dark line right here? It didn't look good. You can't tell where it was. You can't tell where I stopped, where I started. Nowhere in here. Same with this. So if you need to see what we did, reverse this. Drag the recording backwards and look at the area where that used to be, that line. And you can see how I'm gradually just tying in these skin colors and moving along. So let's go back over here to the shadow for the last 5 minutes. I'm going to start tying it in with some of this light flesh. The same process we talked about, I talked about up there, dark and lights. I'm using this light color on top of some of these darker pinks and stuff that I added. I'm not doing my left to right like I usually do because I want to go along with the grain or the, I can't think of the word for it, but the creases of the skin. I guess we don't have a grain, but this creases of the skin. So that's why I'm having to rotate my pencil and do things a little differently. They're still ovals or brush strokes, but they're facing this direction because I want them to kind of to look like the skin is going this way. And I'll just keep building these up. around those. And then I'll see when I'm going that I need some more of that purple color in here. There's this brush stroke here. It needs to be a darker color. And so you just keep building it up. Now there is one other color that you all hear me talk about, two colors. I'm going to talk about Venetian Red real quick. And I'm going to talk about Caput Mortem Violet. Caput Mortem Violet is the darkest shade. So when I get on the very top layers and I see something that's very dark, I'm brush stroking right now some of the Caput Mortem Violet. It's very dark. It's the darkest I'm going to go. I'm never going to put brown. I'm never going to put black on top of the skin in this shadow. If the shadow was literally like dark, like the hair, of course you might use black at the top layer. But because this is skin, I'm never going to put black on this. This is the darkest I'm going to go as far as the really dark shadows, and that's Caput Mortem Violet. I might have to keep going back in. And it can even Caput Mortem Violet, not used properly, can start to look dirty. And so in order to combat that, I use the Venetian Red. So I've got Venetian Red here that is like the darker tone of the sanguine kind of. It has a little bit of orange in it too. And so I can go back over and fill in tiny little holes. I can go back over wherever I went with the Caput Mortem Violet. And I know that that's not going to look dirty because it's red. It's red base and orange base. It's going to have it's going to clean up anything that starts to look dirty in a shadow. But it's only for the darkest areas. And in this case, because this piece is so saturated, so overly saturated, very dark and rich, I'm able to use the Venetian Red. So Venetian Red, Caput Mortem Violet, Terracotta, Sanguine, those are the dark colors that we're using for these shadows. I will sometimes pull in this color here. This is the magenta. No, this is crimson, sorry. This is the crimson color, and so sometimes I will pull it in. It's like a really dark version of the light magenta. So some magentas and other violet colored pencils can sometimes work to balance out that orange tone that gets too overly heavy, but you don't want to get that too much purple violet because it starts to look like a bruise. So just gradually building this up until it starts to look like a natural shadow. That's the process. And it's I'm sorry I wasn't able to, maybe next time we do a shadow I will stay completely on one whole shadow. But it's exactly the way I told you. It's just building up, light brushing, and continuing to do those little round oval strokes. And it can take up to 3 hours. You see, I'm still working on this while we were talking for this. Even though you might have thought this whole was done, it's really not done. It's a lot of layering, a lot of balancing those colors and blending and working them out to make them work well together. So this is something that those colors should help you to start with, to start laying down the colors, building up the shadows. Now we're only talking about her skin tone. If we're doing a really dark skin tone, we're going to keep going with these layers, and we are going to include browns in Hispanic, Spanish, darker, African American, whatever, any black skin, dark skin, we are going to definitely pull in some brown. So when you hear me say I want to take brown away, I'm talking about light flesh skin tones. That's all I'm talking about. Like in the areas here, there's no brown to make the creases of her face. No brown has been used. All that's been used in there is Caput Mortem Violet, Venetian Red, some magentas. I'm not going to go ever and put any brown on her face because people are going to see that and think it's dirty. There's lots of little areas that still need touch up on this area of her shadow of her face. And you won't really see that as an overall, but you can see it when you're working on it closely. So I've been working for 45 minutes of drawing, and you can see I've only got a little tiny bit. If there's any question and answers or questions that anyone has right now, feel free to ask any questions right now real quickly before I end it. I normally try to ask for questions, or I think I don't normally. This is only my second live stream. Probably next time I'll start asking more questions periodically, like does anyone have a question? But know that you guys can just, I have a helper beside me. So while I'm drawing and doing these live streams, if he he's going to be watching it for me, and if he sees, or my daughter or whoever helps me, so I can concentrate on the drawing part. If anyone has a question and they ask, Walt will just say, hey, you have a question, and then I will answer that question as I'm going. So I don't know, were there any questions this time, Walt? Nope. There were no questions this time. So some of you learn better by just watching me draw, and some of you need to ask questions as you go, and you're going to forget them if you don't ask right away. Don't worry about asking questions. Ask them. That's why we're doing the live stream, and so I can get some more interactive stuff going for you guys, and you don't always just have to watch videos that I recorded. So as my Patreon subscriptions grow, right now it's kind of small. I've only been doing this for 2 months. As my Patreon subscription grows, people are going to probably start asking questions. So if you feel a little awkward asking questions, you can always ask them later. The recorded version will be put on YouTube, and I will be sharing the link. You can ask them there as well. I'll try to answer them there. This just makes it a little bit easier to tell everybody at once. So if you decide you have some questions after you watch it and I wasn't clear, or sometimes I jump from one subject to another because I'm trying to talk and draw at the same time, which makes things kind of difficult for the right brain versus left brain. So if I left something out or I wasn't real clear, feel free to message me or contact me after the live streams and let me know that I started a sentence and I didn't finish it or something. Okay, well, thanks a lot for joining my live stream, and hope you enjoy the recorded version if you didn't get to watch it live.